Hi, hope you're doing well. This video is going to be about the book of Revelation and our study in it of chapter 17. So if you haven't had a chance, please go back. Please take a look at the other previous videos. If you like what you're seeing, if you like what you're hearing, share with those who you think might get a blessing. Like and subscribe if you can. There'll be more videos coming. So right now we're going to be going through Revelation chapter 17 and 18. I'm going to combine the two just because they're so interwoven and tied together. I'm going to try to get them both into the same video, so we'll kind of be moving along kind of quick, but if you just take notes, hopefully you'll get something out of it and it'll be a blessing to you. And then we'll, like I said, we'll jump right into it and go from there. So this one's kind of an interesting one because, well, they're all interesting to a degree, but this one is one of the more interesting ones because it presents this figure which sometimes can be very difficult to grasp, or it could be one of those characters that you kind of like, well, okay, what are they talking about here? So anyway, and if you're not familiar, it's the Great Harlot. So I made some notes. I'll probably be referencing those as we go through it, but in any regards, just wanted to make sure I got everything covered because there's going to be quite a bit of material, I think, as we get into it. So I'll go as fast as I can, but I don't want to miss some points. I'll be quoting a lot of verses for you. I won't go and look at every one of them because some of them will cross-reference a lot of them over into Daniel and other parts of Revelation and so forth. Well, instead of going to each one of them and making multiple videos, I'm going to try to squeeze it and condense it all in there and just give out those verses. So if you get a chance, you can go back and actually physically look those up and read them for yourself. So just have a pen and paper, and if you want to make notes, I think it'll be a blessing to you. I definitely think you'll get something out of it, hopefully. And yeah, we'll jump into it. So anyway, it starts out in Revelation chapter 17, obviously, verse 1. It says, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls, so we're in the bowl judgments, obviously, came and spoke with me, saying, come here, I will show you a judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters. So we saw the seventh bowl poured out in the previous chapter, and, unbelievable judgment was occurring. Well, this one, all of a sudden it kind of jumps over into this character that's being judged. And then we'll go into 19, which is, you'll see the finality of false prophet and the Antichrist and so forth, and how, Christ's return, this kind of stuff will come to light in chapter 19. And then we'll get into 20, where it's the actual judgment of the establishment of the millennial kingdom of Christ and the judgment of Satan himself, these kind of things. So it all kind of, so we're going to be moving very quickly as we go through these now. And basically the seven bowls have been poured out. It's the finality of God's judgment here. And now it's taking a pause, and it's focusing on this kind of earthly character, as it were, that as we see in an institution, as we would see. So we'll get into it. Hopefully it'll make sense. Anyway, he goes on and says, he spoke with me, saying, come up here, I will show you the judgment of that great harlot who sits on many waters. And remember those key phrases as we go through it. It'll kind of give descriptions of this harlot and what it's talking about with this harlotry. It's not talking about, sensual harlotry that's committing fornication. It's talking about spiritual. And you can reference that a lot of times throughout the Old Testament, where it references those points. We'll see it like in, I've got a couple notes, Exodus 34, those kind of places where it talks about, harlot. And there's a lot of places throughout Scripture where it talks about that. But anyway, we'll get into some of these. But it says, the great harlot sits on many waters, and with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality. And those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. Now, this immorality that they're talking about isn't sexual immorality. Obviously, all the kings of earth couldn't commit spiritual fornication with their, throughout time. And obviously all the people of earth couldn't commit, actual physical fornication with immorality with this one. No, what they're saying is that they have been seduced by her lies and her deception. So we're talking spiritual acts, that they've bought into the lie of her spiritual deceptions. And he goes into it, says, and he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. We see that again come up, and I'll go through each one of them. But it says, and the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations of the unclean things of her immorality, and on her forehead a name written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, of abominations of the earth. And it says, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly. Well, here you are. I mean, that's pretty interesting. Here's John. He's looking at her, and he's mesmerized by her, and he's wondering. And he's not just mesmerized or wondering great, but he's wondering greatly. He's pretty astonished. Like, what in the world, And it is interesting when you think about, and I'll kind of get some notes here, that this harlot, again, is described as having committed spiritual fornication. She sits on many waters. She's deceived the kings of the earth. She has many blasphemous names, and she sits on this beast that has 7 heads and 10 horns, which sounds very familiar with the beast empire that the Antichrist, the final beast empire, will be. And it goes into, which we can see at a number of places, Daniel 7, I made some notes here. So Daniel 7, 23 through 26. Also, you can look at Daniel 2, 40 through 43. But basically it says, and I wrote here, that, the Great is found only in Revelation 17 and 18. It seems to play an important role in the last days, the Antichrist and the final beast empire. It goes on to say that this is just it's not a literal city of Babylon, but that this represents how it's tied back to Babylon. That apparently, and I kind of brought this out before, apparently how Babylon, I think during the time of Babylon, maybe the time of Nimrod, that this is when idolatry really began. And, the elevation of man to deity status or whatever. But in any case, it seems to tie it back. All the abominations that's ever taken place, all the idolatry that's ever taken place, all kind of gets tied back to the city of Babylon. And for whatever reason, that's why it calls it the mother of Babylon. So I think all the false teachings, ultimately, that's the genesis of false gods, false religions, and where man pretty much turned away from God in a sense, other than obviously the great fall and so forth, but where obviously God had to come down and confuse the languages and in essence create nation states, to protect us from one evil tyrant rising up like Nimrod was, in a sense, precursor to the Antichrist, who will become that tyrant, ultimately, who will deceive the world. And I'll do a video on the Antichrist. So I basically plan on doing a video as we get through these, through the book of Revelation. I'd like to do a video on the false prophet, the Antichrist, Satan himself, and the rapture itself. I don't know what sequence I'm going to do that in yet, but that's kind of the plan. So that way, all of the ideals of and understanding of eschatology, the end times, what God's plan is, for all of us as Christians, what's His end times revelation to us, and that's why I think it's so important, because the time in which we live right now is so revealing that I think we're right there. I mean, you look at everything that's in place right now, and I think we're at a point where all of this is really happening. And I don't want to take too far off on this, but you see all those events happening, like we've kind of gone through. Revelation 11, talks about this worldwide communications. Well, we have that ability to destroy the world by fire throughout the judgments. Well, we have that with nuclear weapons. There's groups out there now that are placing blanketing the satellites around the Earth, blanketing the Earth with satellites. I want to say that SpaceX is working in conjunction with a group called, I think it's called. What's it called? Star something. Slips my mind at the moment. But in any case, they basically their goal is to have like 1,000 satellites by the end of the year, 12,000 from what I read ultimately, and Starlink. That's the name of it. And basically, it's going to be so you can be anywhere on the planet, and you would have access to internet instantaneously. So when we see these judgments happening, 1/3 of the planet being destroyed, and all these things, I always kind of wondered how in the world you could have worldwide communications and everything going on, but you can kind of see that with that type of technology and that being implemented in such a short period of time, and 1,000 satellites between now and the end of the year. I mean, you're talking about, wow, well, it wouldn't take that's only a few, 6-7 months. You're talking about less than, how long would you before you could have 12,000 or close to it, or even more, who knows? I mean, it wouldn't take very long. It seems like with that kind of technology being currently presented and placed in space right now as we talk. So, and who knows, it could even be accelerated to the point where, wow, you could be anywhere on the planet and you have a global connection, unlike anything we've currently experienced. And right now it's pretty amazing where you can currently, pretty much, videotape anything almost anywhere on the planet and have access to internet to post it. But it'll be even, from what I read anyway, it'll be even better, faster. And no matter where you're at, what planet, where you're at on the planet, it doesn't matter. If you're on a mountaintop or anywhere else, it's jungles, it doesn't matter. You'll basically be able to have, as long as there's a satellite connection, you'll have the ability to have internet connection and post or see or whatever, So that kind of plays into it. We can't miss that as well. Not to mention the building of our plans to rebuild the temple, but all the things that go into it, the reestablishment of Sanhedrin, the building of artifacts, the training of a priesthood, the raising of cattle for the red heifer, the raising of goats and sheep for the sacrifices. They can have the Passover sacrifices, all these things, the anointment of the cornerstone rocks, the vestments, the garments, the golden menorahs, everything is already, the instruments, the lyres, everything else that's there that has to be presented is already in the works, are already there. They already are trained in priesthood. They already have all the artifacts. It's not like you have to make this up, but years would have to go into this if we were starting from scratch today. The fact is, we're not starting from scratch today. We already have all those. As far as the geopolitical positioning that we would have to have, if you're looking at Gog Magog, which I plan on doing a video on, those are already in play. We already see the main coalition of nation states, and they're situated right now, maybe not in total mass force yet, but they are situated there, and things can change very rapidly, as we've seen, especially with the instability of what's happening with COVID-19 and the world being economically shaken, and the gold rising and oil being pumped by Saudi Arabia, making things even more dramatically worse for those nation states, Russia, United States, and others, who are the primary benefiting from higher oil prices. And suddenly here's Saudi Arabia throws a monkey in a wrench and basically says, we're going to pump a ton of oil, and it affects not only Russia, but it affects America too. So, and America is in essence, the one who's guarding Saudi Arabia with its forces and so forth. And suddenly, you can see where America is saying, well, hey, you're not our friend. You're not looking out for our benefit. Obviously, you're trying to destroy our oil production and stuff in a time of crisis when things are really bad. Well, we'll just pull our forces out, and we'll leave you to protect yourself. And, it leaves them vulnerable, and it leaves the Middle East open for what you could see with an invasionary force that takes place if things, depending on what happens. But don't get too far out there, but I'm just painting a scenario of how all these things that we talk about and I've been reading about for the last, several weeks can happen very quickly, and that we are that generation that's unlike any other that is seeing these things. Israel wasn't back in its land, it is now. Israel didn't have part of the control over Jerusalem, it does now, and it's even been recognized by the most influential, predominant, prominent Gentile power in the world. Just like at the time the most prominent power in the world was Rome, kicked them out and said, we're going to rename the city and the land. Well, now the most prominent one recognizes Jerusalem. And then not only that, but now they're saying they're going to recognize the annexation or the conquest, as it were, of their promised land of Judea and Samaria. And going back to Joel 3, it talks about when you see the reestablishment or establishment of the Jewish people in Jerusalem and Judea. Both of those are mentioned, not just one. And a lot of people focus on Jerusalem, but it also mentions Judea. Well, with them taking Judea back, that says when that's the time in which he would bring them down to the valley of judgment. Well, if they go ahead with the annexation, which they're now currently talking about, when we see all these other things in play that I'm just talking about, the Temple Mount, the nation states for Gog and Magog, all these things that would have to be in play, none of them isolated, all of them separate, but all of them working in conjunction. And if one of them's not there, then none of it works. But yet they're all in play and they're all there. And yet we see, them talking about this annexation. So be looking for that. Very important. I did a video on that, and I have a reason why they started talking about it, and I've never seen them talking about that before. Suddenly they're talking about it, and lo and behold, the United States is the one who's saying, well, we're going to recognize that annexation. And, and rightfully so, I think so. But the fact that it happens, or it's talked about it's happening, is very significant, especially when you read Joel chapter 3. So sometime we'll jump into that and look at it, but it's very significant. So anyway, we'll keep going. So I just thought you might find that interesting. So anyway, this harlot figure, as we're talking about, is going to play a role in that. And we're seeing this harlot who's basically a spiritual entity, as it were. And as it talks about, it will be a city, that it'll be centered in a city, but it's also global in its impact, which there's not too many fit that one. So it's riding the beast. That means it's situated in the land mass area of this final beast empire. It has control and it has influence throughout the world. It's a spiritual one that's teaching false doctrine, false teaching. The reason it's a harlot is because at one time it was faithful, apparently, but now it's not. A faithful one doesn't commit that, but it's one that's teaching harlotry. It's teaching a false doctrine around the world, and it's centered in this one place, which we're going to see. And he goes on to say in verse 6, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. So this woman, apparently this entity has massively murdered and killed Christians and Jews. Okay, well, if you go through that, it clearly says that. So, that's another one of those things, situated on many waters. And it tells you what these waters are as you read through, that these waters are actually many people. It's not actual physical waters, but the waters are people, different languages, different tongues. So it's international in scope, and it's guilty of killing numerous Christians and Jews. And it is a global religious institution that's teaching a false doctrine to deceive people. Keep all these points in mind, and I'm not making them up, I'm just simply reading them out here, so don't feel like I'm making a judgment on any particular group. I'm simply pointing out that at the end times, it will affect all groups, because they're all going to kind of fall into this category, except those who obviously have received the truth, but those become tribulation saints from chapter 7, and they're murdered for their faith and testimony of Jesus Christ. Goes on to say, and the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I tell you the mystery of the woman. So this angel's going to kind of explain. This is pretty interesting now, right? He goes on to, and the beast, and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to come out of the abyss and go to destruction. So is this where the Antichrist himself has been in essence received a mortal wound, which we saw, and now he's being revived by this one who has the key of the abyss, the Satanist, one who's been thrown down, which we saw in chapter 12, and he in essence resurrects this Antichrist figure by bringing his spirit that now has gone into the abyss out of it, and to re-embody this Antichrist figure, person, physical body, and reconstitute him and heal him of his mortal wound, which is kind of alluded to and talked about in Revelation chapter 13. Well, that's kind of what I get out of it. Maybe somebody else gets something different, but that's kind of what I get out of this, that obviously this beast is coming up out of that, and he's in control of this beast empire. And those who dwell on the earth, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast, that he was and is not and is to come and will come. Now, some allude to that as being like somebody like Nero or something like that has been resurrected out of the abyss, and comes back. I mean, something like that, like reincarnation, as it were. Um, who knows? I guess some people say it's actually the Beast Empire, the revived Roman Empire that's being revived back. Very well could be, especially if you look at Daniel. You get in Daniel 7 and 8 and so forth. It alludes to this reconstitution of the one who is to come in chapter 9 of Daniel, where it talks about the one of the people who has destroyed the temple, which we know was the Roman Empire. Titus and the 10th Legion went in there and destroyed in AD 70. Well, this same one is the same one in which was Emperor Hadrian, who basically kicked the Jews out in AD 32 and basically says, I'm going to rename this Palestinian, if I remember right. It became Palestine, and he renamed the city and so forth, and refused and forbid Jews from living there anymore. And somewhere over a million Jews, I think, were killed in that purge. It was horrible, Holocaust in that day. So anyway, so you can very well be talking about this reconstitution of this final Beast Empire, which is made up in the land geographical area of a revived Roman Empire, which we would know as sorry, quick drink, as we know as the European Union as it is today, or it could be a form of the European Union. Maybe the European Union, as it finally is told, will be made up of different ones, and they may break apart and become part of just this 10 nation confederation or 10 leaders. Hard to say, but could be 10 global leaders. But what we're looking for, and it's not really all that significant really when you think about it. Some people spend a lot of time on it, but I always say at the end of the day, what you're looking for is 10 leaders that will come to power, and that they will have global influence and power, and in some way they'll be tied to the reviving of the Roman Empire, because we know that from Daniel chapter 9, which I just talked about. And we know that they'll give their power over to them, it says, which we're going to read eventually here, that they will basically have one mind and give their power and influence to this one leader who's going to, this Antichrist figure, who will then be part of this, or head up this final Beast Empire, which will be unique and unlike any other. And that's what makes me think it's not just 10 regular nations of like Europe. I think it's going to be something more dynamic than that, more powerful than that. I think it will actually be nations around the world if we have this economic clash, because it seems like the Antichrist's power is mostly economic, but he uses signs and wonders to deceive them. And then he comes into place and he says, he basically enforces this new economic system, which everybody takes a mark, which is actually a marking system to signify ownership by Satan himself. Just like we're the image of God, Adam was the image of God, and we take dominion over the earth. Well, God, or Satan himself, will put his mark on them and to mark them as his own, and have a marking system on them, just like God placed a marking system on the 144,000 and so forth, as we saw in Revelation chapter 7. So anyway, just food for thought of possibilities. And I think getting tied into something that's just locked in, this is the way it is, this has got to be, the exact landmass of the revived Roman Empire. I don't think that's the case. I think that it's a representation of that empire. It's part of that empire, and it may be made up of nations that were part of that empire, but it will be this revived form of it. It will have a senate. It will have a leader like Caesar. It will have imagery, and part of that will come out of that. The laws maybe, or something like that, but it will be a representation of that final Roman Empire. It doesn't have to be that exact city, just like this woman doesn't have to be in the city of Babylon. It's a representation that goes back to Babylon. It comes out of that. And I think the revived Roman Empire, this final Beast Empire, in a sense will be global. We know that because he'll have total domination over the world. So it's going to be global in power, and it's going to have control of the world, economically speaking. And that's why I think maybe this COVID-19 we will drift into some kind of quagmire economically. So maybe we'll go into some kind of Great Depression, and to come out of it will be this unique individual who steps up and becomes this global leader. And that's where I think, America could play a role into this, and other nations that we just aren't thinking about right now, because America does have some of those similarities of Rome. It has the obelisk, it has the imagery in Washington, D.C., it has a Senate, it has a leader, a president. Not saying it is America, but it certainly could be that little horn that comes up late and so forth and talks boisterous and so forth, but has unique power and domination over the planet. Um, could it be that? Very well could be. And could certain nations in Europe join into this final confederation in the final days? Just because they're across the ocean, don't think that they couldn't. They couldn't be in federation together. And I think sometimes we get locked in. We think, oh, it's because it's over there land-wise, geographically, it can't be part of this. It could very well be part of it. You can name a number of nations that could easily join in and say we're going to start a new alliance. Just like you had the Soviet Union, or you had the American, you have NATO, or whatever. You could easily have a new global world order that is made up of like-minded nations who give their power and influence over to, which could be a segment of 10 areas or regions of the world made up of these groups that agree, or nations that agree, and they suddenly give their power to one guy. So we'll get into that as well. So just keep that in mind and the possibilities that where we could be going with that, and how close we really are to possibly seeing it come about. Excuse me. So anyway, he says, he goes on and says, and those who dwell on the earth, whose name has not been written in the book of life and on the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and is will come. Here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains of which the woman sits. Okay, well, that's interesting, right? And they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, so 5 are dead and gone. One's currently when he's reading. The other has not yet come, but when he comes, he must remain for a little while, which obviously seems to be talking about this, but we'll get to the beast which was and is not, is himself also an 8th kingdom. So we know this 8th empire, as it were, or this 8th leader, Antichrist, is going to be part of this revived Roman Empire. And we know that the 7 heads are also 7 mountains, in which this one says, could it be 7 mountains that represent each different region? Or could it actually be Rome, which is known as a city that sits on 7 mountains, or 7 hills, as it were. So very well is a good indication that he's talking about Rome, because he says one is. Well, that's very interesting, because the one that is at the time of this writing was the city of Rome. And he goes on, which we'll see in verse 18. And he goes on, he says, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have not yet received their kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour, so a very short period of time they're going to rule. And these have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast, to this Antichrist figure. So that's why we're saying these regional leaders or whatever, or nation states, will agree to give their power to one guy, which could come out of one of these nations. And don't discount the fact that it could be America, Canada, Australia. It could be distant nations that are all part of this federation. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called the chosen and faithful. That will come up in Revelation 19. This is interesting, because remember he sent out his demons to go and deceive the kings of the world to go to the valley of Armageddon to fight against Christ himself, literally fight against Christ, which goes right back to Daniel 8:25, which says that the Antichrist himself will be killed or slain, but not by human means. Daniel had already predicted that the Messiah is the one who's actually going to come and acquire and take this Antichrist figure and throw him alive into the lake of fire, which we'll see in chapter 19, verse 19. And it goes on to say, and he said to me, the waters which you saw, the heart sits, are many peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And that's why I say it's going to be a global confederation. And it's telling you right there, that's a good indication. So don't get locked in thinking it just has to be Europe or one group or whatever. And the 10 horns you saw are the beast, and they will hate the harlot, and they will make war against her, and desolate and naked, and they will eat her flesh and burn her up. So this city, as it were, which it goes down, we'll jump down real quick. It says, for God has put it in their heart to exercise this. It says, until the words of God will be fulfilled. The woman which you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. The woman which you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. When he wrote this, there was only one city that did that, and that was Rome. Now, does that mean he's talking about the city at that time, at this time, when this happens, or was he talking about the time of the writing of this? If he is, then it's clearly Rome, which means he's talking about a global institution headed up religiously in Rome. And what's weird is Rome has now been teaching and preaching ecumenicalism like never before. And that is the lie that's been going out there. Ecumenical teaching, all roads lead to the same place, no matter what you believe. Chrislam, everything, all religions, believe whatever you want. You see it in the Protestant churches, you see it in the Catholic churches, you see it in the health, wealth, prosperity preachers, all of them. So don't be deceived by it. We'll see where he tells you to come out from her and not be a part of her. So if you're part of that system, come out. We're going to see that in 18 verse 4. I thought we may be able to get them both in here, but we're not. So we're going to do chapter 18 in another video. But God bless, be safe, study scripture, and keep looking up. The Lord promised that he's coming soon. So, and he commanded us to be looking and be ready. So be looking, be ready. God bless.